first of all, a little bit of, I don't know if it's news or whether it's just kind of social media speculation, but there's been a couple of posts I've seen about apparently the RFU has rubber stamped the idea of Prem Rugby going down the franchise model, scrapping relegation, in aid of supporting Prem Rugby searching for investment and kind of external investors to then prop up this what would be closed off league. We've heard about it in the past, we spoke about it bits and pieces, but it feels like maybe a bit more smoke to the fire. Just wondered if there's any thoughts we wish to put to this concept that we kind of expected was on its way.
Yeah, I think that's the point, isn't it? I think we're just reaching the culmination of what felt like sort of an inevitable journey in some ways. To be honest, I'm now more of the opinion that this is probably the necessary end point for Prem Rugby. Or maybe not end point, but this is probably the necessary next step for Prem Rugby in terms of building a sustainable model. My gut feel is that there's no viable way to build a sustainable pyramid system in England at this moment in time.
Why is that? Is that player numbers? Just lack of
investment. Lack of investment. There's not enough money in not enough teams to have a viable pyramid. And we know this because only one team in the last 30 years effectively has been able to come up from the Championship to the Premiership and not go bust. So there isn't really a good argument that promotion and relegation should be open between the Champ and the Prem at this moment in time.
Yeah,
because it's not feasible. What I would argue is this is the best next step for the Prem to become a sustainable model. So you can then build the Prem into probably a 12, 13, 14 team tournament, depending on how far they want to go with that. You then have the opportunity, either simultaneously or once you've built that, to establish the Champ into a more sustainable competition and then expand the Prem into a 2-level franchise. So you have 2 tiers of a franchise tournament. But the trouble is, to get from where we are today to that, you probably have to start by sealing off the Prem, building that out, and then going and doing the same with the Champ. At this point, I don't think there's a viable way to have an open pyramid system all the way to top level rugby in England, which is a shame. You know, my instinct is always that you should have promotion and relegation and have that jeopardy all the way down the league.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's not really been there for a considerable period of time, and it's unlikely to get to that point in a way that will allow the current Prem to retain, financial solvency, or reach financial solvency, I should say.
And I think, so I mostly agree with what you're saying. I think the thing that I am nervous about, and I think it's the angle that is kind of overlooked by most people talking about it, is the term being used, franchises. Because that suggests the possibility of picking up and moving and shaking and doing something very different and taking clubs away from their roots. That worries me as a fan of a club. I imagine it would worry someone like yourself, Rory, who's a fan of a club in quite a congested part of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. No, look, I completely hear that. And there is a definite concern with that. I mean, anyone who's got a bit of knowledge on the history of the NFL will know of the numerous examples of franchises that have been picked up and moved, and in some occasions, it's a devastating effect to the town. If anyone knows about the Indianapolis Colts, were previously the Baltimore Colts, and left Baltimore without a team for several years. There was a massive grassroots campaign to bring an NFL franchise back there because it left the town so kind of bereft. And we don't want to see that in rugby. What my counter to that would be, at least in the short, medium, and probably most of the long term, I don't see that being a problem, because where I think the term franchise league is being used in this is more in an example of how they want to expand the league.
Okay.
So my gut feel would be there's more chance that they will look to expand a franchise league into areas where there currently isn't coverage. So, Yorkshire would be a good example. Actually, the southeast rather than
So what you're
the
saying
west or
is
north of London.
it leaves the door open for them 5 years down the line saying, we're going to introduce a new franchise into the league called the Wasps, for example, and they're going to be based in the southeast of the country.
Well, we know Wasps have got plans to build a stadium in Kent, right?
Yeah,
which is very much an area where actually, although there are teams in Quins and Saracens, because I live in Essex, I've got a little bit of experience of this. It's actually a pain in the arse to get to the Stoop, and it's even more a pain in the arse to get to the Stone X from the southeast. And there's a lot of rugby fans this side of London, who would definitely fill. I'm almost certain that franchise would fill out a stadium successfully. I also think there's a good opportunity and an appetite to put a franchise in Yorkshire.
Yeah,
I think there's enough. I think there is definitely enough appetite there. I would argue Coventry, arguably Coventry and Birmingham, but certainly Coventry's got more of a rugby history, would be an area that's missed. You could argue that might be filled by Worcester, but I'm not certain of that. But certainly there's two big population centres there that aren't being serviced.
Yeah.
You've got the Northwest is probably catered for by Sale, although I would argue in that franchise model, if you were to pick up Sale and move them somewhere else within the Manchester area, where there's a better spot for a stadium that's more central, more
maybe not an industrial estate.
Maybe not an industrial estate underneath a motorway.
Yeah.
Like a flyover. So from that point of view, I think there's always going to be pros and cons to any model. We're seeing the cons to the current model now, right? There's just no financial solvency. So
but I also think this noise is coming off of the back of the good noise that is coming out of Prem Rugby at the moment. That it is probably turning a corner. It is becoming interesting to investors. It seems like they're looking at American investors, which doesn't exactly fill me with lots of hope. But
honestly, everyone is. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, and that's not just sport. No, everyone is looking at US, Middle Eastern investors at this point in time.
Look at Premiership football. Most of the clubs are owned by American.
That's because that's where the sports audience is at the moment.
Yeah,
so that's why they're looking at that.
2031 Rugby World Cup, there may be interest there to try and do something. So I wonder when we hear the next step in this, because it feels like whether this was like a little leak to just test the waters to see what people say.
Well, I think there's a reason why they've leaked this, because whilst this has been rubber stamped by RFU's senior leadership, by the sounds of things, it still has to pass that noblest of organisations, the RFU Council. Because, of course, for rugby in this country, in order for us to organise top-level professional rugby in a way that we think is financially solvent, we 100% need to get the opinion of Dave from Eastern Counties with his gravy-splattered tie, who wants to have ambitions of bringing, little Tidsbury up to the Prem one day if they just get the right investors in. Yeah. The ludicrous situation we find ourselves in, where Prem Rugby is now at the behest of a council of rank amateurs in their blazers and ties.
Yeah.
Discussing about for a jolly on a Saturday afternoon.
No offence to the good people of Little Tidsbury, but it is a problem, and we have spoken about this at length in previous episodes of this podcast.
I am flummoxed by this one. I can't believe that we're now. I think the reason they've leaked this is to put pressure on the council.
Yeah, I think you might be right, and it's interesting that I think, say 2-3 years ago, I think the noise around this would have been mostly against. You look at some of the underlines and some of these things, and most people seem to kind of get it now, I think. So whether people are just coming to terms with actually what the reality is of Prem Rugby, I think they're seeing that there has been a corner turned, but I think they're realising maybe there's only so far that corner can turn without anything major.
What we haven't had, really, what the Prem and the RFU have to set out is a longer term vision for this, and not one that is just we're making money and England win the World Cup. Obviously, that's great. We want those things. What I think people need to see is a plan of, look, we think in 5 years in this model, we can get the Prem not only profitable, but significantly profitable to the point where we can start reinvesting that money into expanding grassroots academies, pathways, etc. Within 10 years, we think we can have a viable Prem and Champ model where we have promotion and relegation between, I don't know, let's say conservatively 26 teams.
Yeah,
I don't think that's an unreasonable ambition.
No, that's realistic. I think that's realistic.
if you implement a long-term plan, but you have to set out that vision for it, because this kind of opaque process that we constantly go through in English rugby, where no one really knows what it is they're trying to get to and how they're trying to get to it. You've got to lay out, look, this is why we think this model works now. This is where we think we can get to in a couple of years, 5 years, 10 years. And this is how we think that will then affect the wider rugby ecosystem. Why we think it's not just good for top level rugby, we think it's good for grassroots rugby too.
Yeah.
That you have to do that.
Yeah, I do wonder if you look through the smoke and mirrors, if there have been little snippets that have been released over the years that are pointing in the direction. Like you think back in the past where we've spoken about, because they announced those kind of junior player contracts, homegrown players under the age of 25 and the kind of their base salary. They've spoken about these kind of A-League returning. All these little things. I just wonder if they're little snippets that they just put out there as feelers to see what people think about it. Because I think these are the sort of things that would need to be considered if you are going to have this franchise league system with a closed-up Prem, try and introduce the champ. Because I think the idea would be to have these A-League sides compete against champ sides.
Yeah, well, here's where I think you can tie some of those things in together. Right now, English rugby's pathway is as healthy as it's ever been.
Yeah.
The work that particularly someone like Conor O'Shea has done in the RFU. Just look at any squad in the Prem at the moment and the number of young academy players that are not only in and around squads, are playing regularly, not just in domestic but European competition. We'll come on to some of those issues later on. But what you don't have an issue with at the moment is there being enough players. There's a mass of young academy players coming through that actually there's not enough games to service.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? There's not enough rugby for these highly talented youngsters to be able to play at their top level. That's the problem.
So you suddenly then have to start thinking about, right, how do we get them game time? And I think that's where they are testing the water with these A-League games, the under 23s league, those kind of things. And I do think that's where the champ has an opportunity. And I do mean an opportunity to tie itself to the future of Prem rugby.
Yeah.
But I think everyone's got to have a bit of vision about it.
Yeah. I did think it was interesting yesterday. I was just perusing the socials and I saw that England Rugby were sharing some champ rugby content. And I think that's the first time I've seen that in a while.
To be fair, I think particularly on Instagram, they've shared quite a bit. They do quite a lot of grassroots stuff, but they also share a reasonable amount of champ stuff.
Oh, good. That shows how much I pay attention to socials. But it's recognisable. But yeah, it's an interesting space. Obviously, here at Rucks, Mauls, Overballs, we're going to stay abreast of this issue because we're very intrigued of where this goes.